Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome all of you that are watching online from around the world, also here in the United States. Thank you for joining us. We're, of course, continuing along in the parenting manual, which the parenting manual really takes everything that we've learned thus far. And, of course, we started this certification course off with the junior high series. And when you get into the parenting manual, you'll see that it's just a combination of all of these books put together, and they're put together in scenarios bringing forth what it would or how it would apply when having a family. And of course, this is for, as David mentioned last week, it's literally, many people have referred to it as the manual for having children. And we've had guidance counselors, psychologists, many people who do these things for a profession refer to these books as such. Something that can guide you, give you instructions, things that can give you, the know-how where you might not have known before. You can always say, well, that person's mom and dad raised them, surely they should know. But not everybody is raised in an environment where you can learn many things, and no one is raised in an environment where you can learn everything. There's always something that can be learned. Even after taking what we teach here in the Peaceful Solution, the day is going to throw forth some challenges. It's going to throw forth some scenarios. It's going to throw things at you that you could not even think of or create. But there always is a peaceful solution to every matter, no matter how critical you think the situation might be. And sometimes it might take a little bit of time, but you'll always be able to find the peaceful solution to remedy something, especially in dealing with your family. And of course, as David was talking about, a few tips of teaching respect. We're going to go back and finish that last part. He left one that he really got in. I'm glad he did. He was explaining about having this care and concern for the environment. He was speaking of calves, and he was talking about how they get a hold of those bags and they swallow them and they die. And that's just one example of many different things that us being carefree and irresponsible and not thinking things are as serious as they should be, how something, I can't say so little, but in the mind of someone is such a small thing to see a bag blowing around, but you have to know that it can actually kill things like that. And here in Texas, when the wind picks up, man, you see those things all over the place. They're just dancing all through the sky. There's no shortage of them out here. But of course, it gets into many other things. And once again, we're trying to tie a list together. But if you look at page 69, we want to finish the last one here. And then we'll move on to our lesson plan for tonight. And it says, page 69, teach children respect for all people by encouraging them to use positive words when describing or talking to others. Words that devalue others due to their nationality or ethnicity should never be allowed. Mistreating others because they are physically or mentally disabled should never be tolerated. Developing tolerance and respect for others will make the world a better place. And of course, many people, where I was raised in the South, we call it the Deep South, when North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, so forth, you hear an enormous amount of racial slurs. That's just part of growing up. You're blessed if you grow up in a family that didn't promote racism. And I'm very thankful I grew up in a family where we were taught that racism is the standard of stupidity. When you start looking at people and trying to judge them by the value of the color of their skin, or you start judging people by their value because of what nation they are from, then you're really confusing yourself. If you think that a person born in the United States is more valuable than a person born in Sudan, then you're really fooling yourself. All life has value. You should just be thankful that you're born in a country where you have much more opportunity to have a somewhat decent life. If you ever think you have it bad here, then I'll introduce you to some people in Malawi, Sierra Leone, Sudan itself, parts of Somalia. Explain to them how your water didn't come out of your faucet that day, and they'll tell you how far they have to walk just to get water. unless it rains. Then they collect that, and hopefully the dust storm didn't blow the dust up before the rain, because then the water's dirty and you can't drink it then either. You know, and we think about all of these things, and you think about this, you think about the pure hatred that's put in by identifying someone. You know, here in Texas, of course, people come across the Rio Grande, the river that divides the United States from Mexico, and of course is a term for people that come across because they're wet. I'm not even going to mention it, but if you live here in Texas, you know exactly what it is. It's a very derogatory term, and it just basically describes a person that crosses the river illegally. But once again, I always tell people, I'm very thankful. I was born in the United States, and I've been to countries that if I was born in that country, I would probably spend most of my time trying to get to a different country. And the only reason I say that, because I was born and raised in the United States, so I see what that country is missing. Many of these people only hear what they're missing, and they see it on the television, and they think that that's what's out there for them. That's not reality. And we'll get into it. All of these things tying together, and we'll get into them more tonight about how there should be a factual teaching. When I say factual teaching, not this fantasy that's shown on TV, not this fantasy that people want to live, but what life is truly about, what life is actually about. And of course, when you implement racism into it, or dividing people because of the color of their skin or their nationality, it's teaching hatred. You know, if you think it's funny to tell the child something, or, you know, something derogatory for someone. I've seen someone post here not long ago, you know, that person came here and they don't have a right to be here. Send them back where they belong. And I'm thinking, man, what if we got your family together and looked up your heritage and sent you back where they came from too? You know, unless you're an American Indian, you probably shouldn't be opening your mouth. Yeah, at least here in the United States. You should really consider how this country was formed. And I'm not endorsing illegal immigration in any which way, shape, or form, but I'm saying consider why people are coming here. And have this conversation with your children. You really should. Because society is set up right now for the United States, for you and I to have this great life we have, to have this easy life, to have our economy booming, to have things cheap as we can get them, and of course tariffs coming through, we'll put that aside for the moment. For us to have things to be very inexpensive requires a lot of other countries to suffer in poverty. If you want to buy something extremely cheap, you'll notice it's not made in the United States, because they're not paying someone $25 or $30 an hour. They're paying them $25 or $30 a week. And they're working them 16 hours a day. So think about next time that you want something and, man, I want that dirt cheap. Well, think about what it took to produce that item. And then think about the company that made that item is also making a profit, or else it wouldn't be sitting here for sale. And then think about how little the people got paid to put that together. And once again, that's illegal. And that we should remember that. The things that are illegal in the United States to treat people in such a way is what we build our economy on in other countries. Why does Apple build iPhones in India and China? Because it's cheaper. They want to make maximum profits, trillions of dollars. Could they build them in the United States and still be worth billions? Sure they could, but they don't want billions. They want trillions. And it's not about paying people a fair wage. It's about having product created for as little as possible and making maximum profits. Well, in that ideology, people suffer. People live very hard lives. And if you think that's the way it should be, you're going to train your children to have that same attitude. They're going to devalue people the same way, you know, and it's kind of like when we talk about war in the United States. The attitude is, as long as it's not here, it can be wherever else it wants to be. It just can't be here. Well, you know, we live in a society where it's not going to be that way forever. But once again, think about this ideology you put into your children's minds. There's many ways you can do it. But think about it. Consider what we're doing. And continuing here on page 70, it says, encourage children to look for an opportunity to accentuate the positive in all people, regardless of where they are from what they look like, or what they believe. And once again, there's something positive you can point out in anybody. And I tell you, one thing that it just amazes me, and it never ceases to amaze me. Myself and William and Katan, we speak to a lot of people all around the world. And I speak to people who speak different dialects, and we have to have translators translate for us, because some of the dialects you can't find on Google Translate. There is no audio translation for them. When you get into tribal dialects, it's not important enough for someone to do it. And when I hear people talk and I hear languages, I'm always completely amazed that that is a form of communication where people can communicate just like you and I are doing right now. And it's very different. You know, I've heard Arabic. I've heard many different languages from Kenya, Swahili. I've heard Igbo, many different languages out of parts of Africa all over. Always amazed with even different dialects of Spanish and so forth, and Hebrew. There's just so many out there, and people communicate on an everyday basis this way. And when you think about, try to learn another language, and you'll always be amazed when you try to study. You know, I'll give you my example of Spanish, and I deal with a lot of 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old children around the world that speak Spanish. And you think you got it down until a 5-year-old comes up and they're still speaking better Spanish than you can. And you're trying to have a conversation with the 5-year-old and you realize, no, they're more adequate at this than I am. I can't even do it with them because it's a part of them. They were trained to do it. And, you know, I speak with people in other countries. They developed the ability to speak English really well. And I'm amazed at how well they did it. But one thing somebody told me one time, they said, as a child growing up, we don't have all of the things you have in the United States. So picking up another language is very easy. We have nothing else to do. And when you watch American movies, you listen to American music, and everything that you partake of as American, you develop the ability to speak English. And I thought, well, I asked the person, how did you learn to speak English? Just watching movies and listening to music. That's how I learned. I'm like, but how did you understand what it meant? Watching movies and listening to music. And I told them, I said, well, I feel sorry for you if you're listening to music from America and thinking that's the way normal people talk, because we really don't talk like that. You'd go to prison if you did stuff like that. And they did say that it is true that music in America is much more violent than music in the Spanish culture or so forth, that American music has a lot of violence in it. And that's true. But once again, think about these things we're allowing our children to partake of. So once again, we encourage our children. It says, this is the best role model by you, the parent. Your respect for others will ripple outward to your children as well. You know, and I always think about that. We didn't quite get into that when we were talking about the ripple effect through our children. But imagine that in your mind, that when you have children and you raise them, your ideology is going to ripple out through your children, and then your grandchildren, and then your great-grandchildren, all the way out through society. And as we said in the very beginning, as we were reading a quotation from the author of The Peaceful Solution, it's in every junior high unit, that our future leaders of tomorrow are our children of today. If you want to make a change in what you see that is wrong, you have to change the ideology in the children, because they are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And of course, that's the way that you start to fix a problem. You have to change whatever is broken. You have to change it. You have to fix it. You can't keep excusing it. You can't keep kicking other countries down. You can't keep, you know, if you think that we're successful, and I want to be very careful how I say this, because I love the United States. I love living in the United States. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I actually love living here where I live in Texas. Never thought I'd say that 20 years ago, but I do. It's not a very pretty place, but it's a great place to live. Nowhere near as beautiful as the East Coast, which is where I grew up. But I've lived over half my life here. But if you think success comes at the hardship of others, then you'll never have peace in your life. if you think that other people have to suffer on a global scale so one country can have it easier, you're just creating a lot of enemies. And if you think that people don't recognize that, you've never been to countries where they will rob you so quick because you can go get another one. They can't. They don't look at, they're actually called mercenary robbings. They actually rob you. They don't stab you. They don't hurt you. They just take your iPhone, your Apple Watch, your Samsung phone, whatever, your iPad, things that normally people have here in the United States, but it is unheard of in these other countries. So they take it, and they look at it, and they're like, well, hey, that's all we're doing. Go back and get another one. There's plenty where you came from. You know, and someone asked me, do they not have iPhones in like South America? That was the example they used. I said, yeah, they have this very same iPhone in South America, and it's $400 more than it is in the United States. I don't know how in the world people afford to buy products like that. I don't even want to know how, because it can't be in with the economy structure, that's for sure. There has to be something outside of that. But think about this when you put it in the mind of your children. Remind your children how, you know, I'll keep using the word blessed they are, just to be able to be in a country where these things are readily available. So take and make the full use of the ability that you can have at an education, learning the peaceful solution. You know, one of the greatest things is we're able to come to this auditorium and sit here to learn a program that people are watching all around the world. And if they have internet, they watch it. If they have data on their phone, they watch it. You know, when you compare, like here in the United States, you know, we're using lights right now, and you know, every 30 days or every 29 days, they send you a light bill. Well, if you go to a place like Ghana, they don't send you a light bill. You have to buy your electricity ahead of time. You have to go on your phone, buy data for your electricity. When you pay for it, they send you a code. It goes with your meter. The lights come on. You don't get to use it first and pay later. No, you pay first and use it later. And if you have it, you have it. If you don't get to watch class. You don't get to do all these other things. You sit in the dark. And that's reality. And Ghana is pretty developed. It's not like some of these other countries. Pretty developed for Africa. Maybe not compared to the United States, but it's still developed to a certain extent. So when you go through these things and when you're putting these things in the mind of your children, one thing you should always tell your children as you're bringing them up is that there's no separation of value when it comes to country, color, ethnicity. No, you're not more valuable because you're a boy and your sister's a girl. That doesn't make you more valuable. That can even be a confusing conversation, but we won't get into that. But make sure they understand when we say all life has value, that's exactly what the peaceful solution means. All life has value. Everybody. There's no one that's left out. So looking over here to lesson plan 9, we're going to get into teaching children responsibility. Now, of course, that's assuming that the adults have learned responsibility, or learning. I should say learning, because as we'll get into tonight, and we covered this in the responsibility unit, responsibility is a character trait that has to be learned and developed. So here on lesson plan 9, page A, continuing just right across from page 70, our purpose and objective is that students will learn techniques to help them teach their children how to be responsible. So obviously the parents are going to be learning from this book also. And part of picking up this book and wanting to put forth the effort shows the developing of responsibility. And of course here you see the materials is the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Parenting Manual, and of course pens or pencils. And our purpose here, we're going to briefly review lesson plan 8, which was teaching children about respect by asking the following questions. And of course, what does respect mean? And if you look back over to page 61, I believe it is, 61, the definition here is a little bit more in detail than what it was in the character unit, because we're talking about a family environment. And here on page 61, at the very top of the page, it says another important positive character trait that every parent must have is respect. Respect is to show honor, esteem, care, and concern for others, property, the environment, ourselves, and all life. And of course, not exactly in that order, because if you look at that and you think, well, who is the first person or the first thing I must respect? Obviously, you're going to remember chapter 2 of the respect unit, and it goes back to self-respect, where it explains that if you don't learn to develop to respect yourself, you'll never learn to respect someone else. It's very hard to respect someone else if you don't respect yourself, because you don't even see the value in your own self. So remember, once again, that's where you can find the definition to it. And notice it says, like self-control, respect is a pillar of positive moral character and is therefore vital to the life of each individual and our society as a whole. So once again, it's just as important. It's a pillar, so it's part of that foundation. It's something that, if you imagine the stability of this building and you see these iron pillars in the building, if you start knocking them out, or if they were weak, not very strong, the structure is going to start collapsing. It's going to start falling apart. It's not going to give you the safety, the protection that you expect or that is needed to keep everyone safe. It's the same way when we don't develop these abilities to show respect or self-control, and of course building up to responsibility. If any of those things are lacking, it causes harm, it causes confusion, it causes difficulties to arise where they should not really even exist. Let's get through the next two, and I'm gonna pose a question to you that was posed to me this last week, and the answer was very simplistic, but you can think about it. But here, back on lesson plan, page 9, it's question number 2, or excuse me, point 2b. It says, what are some factors that contribute to a lack of respect? And of course, going back over to page 61, and it covers a few different pages, but back on page 61, if you look down, it'll be the third paragraph. It starts by saying, page 61, the breakdown of the family unit is only one way disrespect has manifested itself in our society. Notice it says, if we evaluate the problems we see in society based on the principles of respect, honor, kindness, and compassion, we can clearly see how a lack of respect has affected all areas of society. The increasing number of domestic violence, school bullies, robberies, car thefts, rapes, murders, and overflowing prisons all attest to the fact that a society, self-respect, and respect for others are sorely lacking. A decline in moral values has greatly contributed to the lack of respect, and that is now interwoven into the fabric of our society. So once again, this lack of education, this lack of implementation, and remember, this is a lack of education that could have been offered to a generation, but it was missing. Well, here we're talking about multiple generations, but it was missing. So it's been missing so much. You see here, we describe it as now it's become interwoven. And if you've ever seen, I deal in a lot of textiles and fabrics. And if you ever see what it means to be interwoven, it means it's become a part of something because it's woven. If you imagine you have something above and something below, and you just have a lot of those things. And you have something that goes up and down in between it. And then something that keeps going this way. And that's what it means to be interwoven. You weave these things together and they interlock with each other. So when you pull, it's almost impossible to get it out. It's almost impossible to separate it. In fact, it makes it stronger as a piece of material. Well, here we're creating something. We've added something in that it actually makes it weaker. We're breaking it down. We've put something in our society. We've woven it in to be a part of everything we're doing through entertainment, through dress, through casual conversation because of the vulgar jesting and so forth. Just through basic entertainment you sit down and you watch on your television. It's become so much a part of society that it's almost, the shock factor is almost gone now. It's almost become to where if you hear something immoral in a song, it's just considered normal now. Which years ago, if you heard a curse word in a song, it was like, oh, they won't even play that on the radio. And I remember there was a song came out, oh man, I was like probably 10 years old. And this song had such a popular riff on the intro to it. I still hear it being played on the news channels I watch, and it never ends. And I think, man, this song is never going to die. And in that song, there was a word that was used that would be considered derogatory today, but back then it was used to describe a certain type of man. But now they've even changed the word in the song, I've noticed, to where they don't use that word anymore. And it shouldn't have been used to begin with, honestly. It should have been some more education offered there. But of course, all of these things have tied into breaking down what once was, that should not be allowed. That should not be in the minds of our children. To now, you can actually listen to music. Sadly, I learned more about American music outside of the United States than I do inside the United States, because here I don't listen to music really. It's something I used to listen to a lot. Once I became more educated about the things I was listening to, I pretty much stopped. There's only a very small amount of music I'll listen to that's really put out by the Peaceful Solution. And the rest of it, pretty much you can see how it's kind of detrimental. I'm not saying all music is bad. I love instrumental music. But there's a lot of things. I've heard American songs, and I won't even begin to say what they are. But I've heard songs outside of the country made by America. Didn't even know these people existed in the United States. Never heard it. I don't listen to radio, so it's kind of hard to hear. I don't even think they'd play this on the radio. But it was songs made here in the United States. They're very big in the Latin culture, and it's literally about raping women. And it's in full detail. There's nothing left to the imagination. And the first time I heard it, I was like, what's the name of that song? Because I thought, there's no way. I was riding in a taxi, and they were playing it in the taxi. And I asked the guy, I said, "Tu entiendo? Will you understand this?" He's like, no. I said, man, if you understood it, you wouldn't be playing this music. And I finally looked up the lyrics on the internet, and I couldn't believe it. If you were to do something like that, you'd go to prison for 30 years. But it was music that people were listening to. And it's mind-blowing. It's sad, but these are the things that we're talking about has been interwoven into our society for our children to listen to. These are the role models that's supposed to be there for them. These people that are popular, they're making millions. That's how everybody wants to be, right? Well, I know in the United States we have people that become millionaires because they put out perverted tapes, and they make millions because of this, and they make millions because of that. And you start looking at it and you think you're much better off never being a millionaire. Just live day-to-day life, get the things you need, build your family, survive, and you're better off, because it seems like anybody that gets into this million-dollar structure, especially billion-dollar structure, there's a lot of things going wrong in their life. But sadly, that's what feeds into society. But going back here to Lesson Plan 9, page 9A, and we're on point C, and it says, what are the 4 main categories of respect? Now, this is very different than what are the 4 types of disrespect that you learned in the respect unit. This is what are the 4 main categories of respect. And if you look back to page 65, let me get over there real quick. Let's see here. Page 63. I'm sorry, I wrote down the wrong page ever. Page 63. And it says, it starts with you. If we take a closer look at respect and how it applies to individuals, our community, and even our nation, we see that respect can be divided into 4 main categories. Self-respect, respect for others, respect for possessions, that's both yours and others, and then, of course, respect for the environment. And the environment, once again, we cannot stress enough, It's not just the birds, the air, the trees. It's even the community you live in. All of those things help make up your environment. And if you notice over to the side, the quote from the Peaceful Solution, it says, opportunities to teach respect are all around you. And of course, sometimes respect in a situation, you might think that respect is something that is very easily done and boom, made a decision, there it is. But think about, let's say if you have an area of multiple departments. And in those multiple departments, you have very different instructions, you have different jobs. When I say instructions, it doesn't mean one person says you can do this and one person says you can't. I mean, one person has to do this for a job. If you just think about a house, one person's a plumber, one person's an electrician, one person's a framer, one person does drywall. You'll have endless things. You'll have someone to come in and do flooring. They'll specialize in that. And then, of course, once the house gets built, then it goes into a whole nother way of expenditures. When you get decorators involved and everything else, then you really start spending money. But everybody has a job. But the one thing that you find is everyone has to agree with the person that comes before them, or has to think of the person that's coming after them for everything to work together. And sometimes something kind of puts a bump in the road, and you think, oh, got to deal with that now. But to deal with it now might not be the best situation on how to properly deal with it now. Because there might be other things involved that has to be dealt with to actually make it to where everything's not a total loss. Because sometimes situations get to the point that everybody's right in saying it shouldn't be like this. You're right, it shouldn't be. But now we have to fix it, but it shouldn't have got there. So what should have taken place before it got there? What should have occurred? So you have to literally go back quite a few steps, and then you start fixing the problem. But you have to get all of these divisions in line to agree so you can fix the problem. And you just don't want to barge in on someone, because then you'll start showing a lack of respect, and people become offended. People feel like you and I, all of us have made bad decisions. And in those bad decisions, whenever they're pointed out to us, we can feel pretty foolish about what took place. And we can do that to other people. But the response that we get from them is, well, what do we do and how we deal with it? How do we actually move forward with it? And when you think about that, the respect, and you throw a child into that and the development of that child, then it really starts coming together on how you can demoralize and break someone down before they ever get the opportunity to start moving forward. So we really need to get into the lesson plan, because there's a lot of really great things to cover tonight in this chapter. So looking here at Procedure 2, it says, explain to students that in today's lesson they will learn how to help their child become responsible. Ask for volunteers to tell in their own words what being responsible means to them. And notice the answers will vary. And you're not looking for textbook answers. You're looking to see what everybody has been taught and what responsibility means to them. And some people might have a very kind of interesting ideal of what it means to be responsible. If you remember back, I want to go over just this, and I'll read it to you quickly. You can write down the pages for your notes. In the responsibility unit, in chapter 1, in the introduction, it says, you can count on me. That was the title of the chapter. And at the very top of the page, it says, anything worth doing is worth doing until you get it right. And once again, through repetition, through practice, all of these things must be applied. And it started out by saying, have you ever stopped to consider why people are so different? Why are some people honest while others are dishonest? Why are some kind while others are unkind? The difference in how we behave and how we treat others are based on our character. It's based on what we've been taught. It's based on how we've been taught to process and to deal with things. It says a person's character is made up both of positive and negative traits, and that's all of us, every one of us. It goes on to say on page 5 that when people fail to take their duties and obligations seriously, they are called irresponsible. And I want you to think about this for a moment. Let's say you have a situation. And let's say you have a situation through just going through the normal pathway, that someone notices this doesn't agree with this. So let me inquire to see what is the actual agreement. And when someone acquires, of course, you have people that if there was an agreement, you want to make sure the agreement is adhered to, just like a mom and a dad. If dad says you can do something and mom says you can't, well, you probably want to go back and see, well, what does mom know that I don't know? You know, why are you coming asking me? Did your mom tell you no? So now you're coming to ask me, and knowing that I don't know all of the details, hoping that I will give you a different answer? Or even as adults, we get different answers. And we can be so upset sometimes over someone doing something wrong that we forget the actual action that took place, whether it was intentional or unintentional. Most of the time with children, I know as a child, when I did it, I intentionally did it. Oh, mom said I couldn't do this. Let me go ask dad real quick. You know, back then there wasn't cell phones, so you couldn't really call somebody. So you'd make sure dad was way out on the back side of the property. We couldn't ask mom real quick. And then you would ask him. But somehow it's like they had telepathy. They knew what each other were saying. But once again, this irresponsibility we can be irresponsible in even how we react to something by not processing it properly. And as parents, we have to be careful that you don't throw the other parent under the bus when it comes to doing things, because you're actually teaching your child to not listen to both of you. And that's part of being responsible, you know, making sure that both parents agree that there's a certain standard, and that standard has to be upheld. And as a parent, there's going to be some times to where you might see a situation to where the other parent implements a certain punishment because of something that was done. And when I say punishment, I don't mean taking a stick and beating them. I mean take away something. They might get grounded from doing something. And you have to actually look and see how everything played out. And sometimes it's best just to stay out of the situation and let everything take its course. Because the last thing you need to do is tell the child that, don't worry, you're really not going to get in trouble for doing this. Because whenever they go do something else, the judge isn't going to go, don't worry, you're really not going to get in trouble for doing this. No, you're going to have to answer for what you did when you broke the rules. And it can be very dangerous. So make sure these conversations that come up about what responsibility really is, make sure to, dive into the details sometimes without exposing what people are saying about their own personal lives. But try to bring out some examples that you can think of that you see in society. It's kind of like today in the United States, another day, another school shooting, like it never ends. But go back 30 years ago, it's almost like they were never heard of. Today, it's like every day you see another one. It never ends. Well, why? Well, I'll pose this question to you before we get to this one. A person asked me just yesterday from a country that I've never talked to before, so it was very interesting to hear what they had to say. And they said, the peaceful solution says that we already have what we need in this world to fix our society. And the answer was yes. We already have what we need in this world to fix our society. But sadly, we also have in this world what we need to destroy our society. What we have to do is teach people how to make a better choice. And they said, well, how will you do that? Everything takes money. I said, well, why don't you Google how much the world spends on war and text me back tomorrow? If you could get rid and start solving wars and arguments and disagreements, only then can you start fixing society. Because war, disagreements, arguments take up an enormous amount of time that could be spent on educating people in peace. And it takes an enormous amount of money. In fact, you'll find that war is the absolute most expensive thing on the face of this earth. It costs an enormous amount of money. And I'm not just talking about the loss of life. I'm just talking about monetarily. And if you don't think about that, figure it up and see. War is the most expensive thing that society contributes to. It is unbelievable the amount of money that nations contribute to war. Imagine if you just took, the author of The Peaceful Solution used to say, just give us what one missile costs. Just one missile, allow the Peaceful Solution that money to put it to use in educating, building schools around the world, not just in the United States, but in every country, and start educating the youth. You give us 12, 13 years, we'll have a generation that will not learn war anymore. It'll all be done. Because they will know of a different way to fix their problems. And that's part of being responsible. So think about it. Continuing in the way of war, is that responsible or irresponsible? Because it hasn't brought peace. It hasn't brought the effect that we're looking for. So start thinking about it. And we've talked to world leaders and we've asked them. And we've had U.S. senators and congresspeople tell us, yeah, it's very irresponsible to have war. But it's the only way you have the upper hand on everyone else. It's the only way we have the life we have here. But I'll be honest with you, if we have to make other people suffer to have this great American dream, then it's time to rethink the great American dream. The great American dream should be in every country. Why is it that everybody else should suffer? It doesn't seem fair because it's not fair. If you had a scale and you were weighing out the measures to see if they're balanced and equal, you would find out your scale has to be very lopsided. But the United States, the author of The Peaceful Solution had one of his mathematicians that he had on staff at one time figure out how much better would life be if we got rid of war. Not only would everybody's life be better, but Americans would have a much better life. Even life here in the United States would increase many-fold over with having no financial stress, eliminating debt. People would have their own land, their own homes, all of these things you would have. And everybody else would too. But you know what you couldn't have? You couldn't have war. You wouldn't be able to go fight and take other people's things. You would actually have to pay for them. You couldn't go to Syria and steal their oil. You couldn't go to Libya and kill their leader. You would actually have to pay people for their product, just like the United States wants to be paid for their product, or the European Union, or Russia, or, so forth. And then, of course, they get to argue over who does it belong to. Well, remember, these were all children at one time. That's the reason I'm going into this. And looking over here to bullet point 3, we're going to go on to page 71, and it says, paraphrase the first 2 paragraphs on page 71. So as a teacher, that means you're going to read over it, kind of discuss it, and then you're going to get into reading it. Notice it says, explain that in many ways, children are a reflection of their parents. Have students express what they would like to see reflected in their children. Have a volunteer read the section responsibility. What is it? On page 71. Have students write down ways they are responsible. Volunteers can share with the class. So once again, you want people to volunteer. You don't want to dive too far into people's private lives, but you do want to kind of make a connection with your class. So looking over here to page 71, procedure 3, and here lesson plan 9, teaching children responsibility. And of course, as a teacher, as it said, you're going to kind of paraphrase what we're talking about just to get some ideology, get some discussion going in the class. Because this manual is really made up a lot on having interaction. And if you have 10 different parents in your class, you're going to have a lot of feedback. And a lot of these classes right here, they're taught, imagine having 5 people in your class. All 5 people have had their children taken away from a governmental service that has required them to come take this class. That's one thing that I will give a certain governmental service here in the United States, especially in South Texas. They're big promoters of educating people to learn how to take care of their children. And that's really what it should be. If someone's messing up and something's going wrong where a child's life is in danger, education is the key. And they've seen that. And they're doing a great job by making that available for these parents. But have 5 different groups of parents. they've all lost their children. You're going to have 5 completely different situations. And their lives, you'll find out themselves, they went through some very different situations themselves. It's not, everything is not ideal the way we think of, Leave It to Beaver or something like that, where, mom's at home doing chores and cleaning up the house and cooking the meal. The boys are at school, the girls are at school, and then there's after school activities. The dad's at his office job making lots of money, and he comes home in his nice car to his beautiful house with a white picket fence that goes all the way around it, and everybody just comes home and they have a great old time. I don't know that I've ever met anyone that had a life like that, honestly. It sounds great, though. It really does sound great. I was growing up, when my parents came home from work, they worked some more. For my whole life, I would watch my dad get up at 5 o'clock, be at the furniture factory at 7 o'clock, leave at 3:30, pick us up at the school bus stop at 4. We'd get home by 4:30. By 5 o'clock, he was out either plowing the garden with a hand tiller, which was a couple of acres, out working the garden with a hoe and a rake, because we didn't have a tractor. That would have been unheard of. Out working on cars, because he'd rather have his 66 Chevy truck than anything else. He wanted something he could work on. Or just fixing up a lawnmower. He wouldn't buy a new one. He'd go buy one, and the lawnmower we had was like 10 lawnmowers in one, because he just wouldn't go buy a new one. Part of it because, we didn't have, money wasn't that available back then. But we never lacked anything. But I remember watching him work, and the first thing he would do is he would put lights up, because he would work way into the night. And when he was done working, he came inside and did it all over again the next day. That was just life. He never stopped. I never seen him come home from work, sit down in front of a TV and watch a TV. I never seen that in my life. And one thing that he never complained. He enjoyed what he did. And that's one thing that we learned from him, was enjoying always staying busy. But sometimes, you have to take a breath. You have to take a break. And sometimes your studies is the best break to take. Well, looking here, teaching children responsibility. And of course, this comes in many different ways. As parents, we have a great responsibility to prepare today's children for tomorrow's world. By modeling positive character, children will follow our example and make choices that will benefit them and society. Now, I want you to think about just 20 years ago, how much society has changed in 20 years. And remember, 20 years ago, there was no smartphones. 20 years ago, I don't know if there was Facebook or not. I know there was MySpace. And I never got on MySpace. I never had a space on MySpace, so I guess it was your space. I never had a space on there. But look at how much everything has changed. In the social medias, there's social medias I've never heard of. There's an app for everything. I don't care what it is. You look at the app store, and there's just endless apps for everything. It's almost like you don't even have to think for yourself anymore. Your app will tell you what to do. I even have one that tells me when to go to bed. It's a reminder, go to bed. You're supposed to be sleeping this many hours, go to bed now. Start preparing for bed. 15 minutes, you should be in the bed. I'm never in the bed, and it reminds me, you are not in the bed. You are supposed to be sleeping by now. And it's like I get into an argument with my phone. Like, I got things to do, and I'll just throw the phone over somewhere. And, of course, if I followed it, that would help me some. But, once again, think about how much different would our world be 20 years from today than it was 20 years ago, because everything is going toward AI. I talked to a person the other day who I met them, and they were I'm not going to tell their name, where they're from, or anything else, and they don't mind me sharing parts of their story. They wouldn't want me to identify them, but they were suicidal. They've been suicidal pretty much their whole life. They're a young person. They're just becoming an adult. They don't live in this country, I'll tell you that much. And I was talking to them the other day briefly, and I said, how are you working things out? They said, I talk to AI every night about my problems and AI tells me what to do. I said, you mean AI actually told you to read the peaceful solution? They said, no, but it said find someone to talk to you can trust, so that's why I messaged you. And I thought, I can introduce you to a whole world of people you can trust, but then you got to put it to work. You know, the sad thing about, and I learned from talking to that person, when a person gets into depression, and this is a young person, they want to change, but they're so mentally pulled down, they don't personally want to have to do anything to find change. They want someone to give them the magic pill that's going to change it. And the sad part about life is there is no magic pill that's going to change it. We all have to put forth effort to change it, especially in our own lives. And when you're talking about someone that their parents are supposed to be role models, you know, I won't get into their story, but I'd say within the next year, there won't be any parents around anymore, because the events of life have made life end very quickly. You can't run from disease. It's there, and there's nothing you can do to get away from it. And then you're going to be very young, and you're going to have some responsibilities that your parents had that you're going to have to deal with. And what are you going to do? It's a hard thing, you know, but making the right choice is always the most difficult. Continuing on, it says, it is a fact that who children become and what they deem important depend largely on what they are taught and what they put into practice. You know, such as coming to the Peaceful Solution classes or getting your education in things that are beneficial. No matter what, there's many classes I attend that are outside of the Peaceful Solution. And a lot of them are online. I watch a lot of classes online, listen to a lot of classes online. And of course, they're all character building, though. They're about developing character development, making right choices. And of course, I listen to a lot of Peaceful Solution classes. I listen to classes that some of you sitting here teach, that we have the ability to go back and pull them off the internet, that they upload when you're teaching them through certain avenues that we use, and we have a database of them. And there's not one person you can't learn from. Everybody, we're learning now. We have a lot of student teachers right now that are going through teaching classes. Some of them are young children. I say young children, they're teenagers. And we have both boys and girls very capable of teaching young people their ages. But there's not a class that you listen to that you can't learn something that you'll benefit from. Everybody. But it says, once again here, it is a parent's responsibility to instill within their children the need to practice positive character in all aspects of their life. Parents who are accountable and responsible for their choices will be able to raise children who choose to be accountable and responsible as well. This will develop a greater sense of self-worth and confidence in their ability to make the right choice or right choices. You know, one thing when you deal with people that become suicidal, it's really, and I don't want to downplay this in any which way, shape, or form, because suicide is a huge problem here in the United States. But when someone is suicidal, one thing that you learn by talking to them, they have lost the view of their self-worth. And you can see it, other people can see it, but they can't see it. And trying to get a person to see their own self-worth again when they're buried in a lot of problems, and of course you can give them solutions and you can tell them how to do it, but it's not as easy done as what you're saying. And of course there's all kinds of things going on in that person's mind that you're not going to be knowledgeable of. And of course there are a lot of people that study how to deal with things like this, and you always recommend, hey, you need to go and get with a professional, a medical professional, because I sure am not a medical professional, and get some guidance on this too. I can only help you in developing positive character, and I'm still doing that by myself, by the way. Don't call me or message me thinking that I finally finished this task and now I want to share it with you. I'm still on the same path as you're on. And I still go through the same challenges and the same frustrations and the same want to throw my hands up and walk away from some things sometimes. Everybody goes through that. Sometimes it's you feel that everybody else is succeeding and you're the only one going through it. And that's not true at all. We all go through these things. And of course, as a parent, what are you showing your child? Because it's going to ripple out through them, into them, and then outwardly. Or it could be something greater than they can bear. Finishing up this paragraph, it says, they will earn the reputation of being dependable and trustworthy people who take responsibility for their actions. Now, responsibility, what is it? And of course, we're continuing here in Procedure 3. It says, just like any other positive character trait, responsibility must be developed over time. So develop, building it, growing it. It's something that you don't do it one time and it's done. Being responsible means you're someone others can count on to fulfill your duties and obligations, but most of all, you can count on yourself to make choices that are positive and supportive of your moral character development. Now, does that sound like something you would want to instill in your children? It's 100% something you would want to instill in your children. But I want you to think about this. Let's read the second paragraph, and then, of course, we'll get into teaching responsibility, but that'll go into the next class. But here with this last paragraph, it says, responsibility, notice, is developed through everyday task, interaction, and experiences. So I want you to think about this. Let's say you have a facility you use. And let's say you eat and you drink and you do things in that facility. We have a couple here facilities that we use for even young men and young women. Now, one facility, I can tell you for sure, that place is thoroughly cleaned at the end of every day, because that is showing respect and value and appreciation to the organization that allows use of that facility. Now imagine if that same group just left their cups all over the place, food laying at the back or up in the front, stuffed underneath the table. Or if they allowed, the ants to come in and start getting into things, go into the bathroom and stuff's everywhere except where it was supposed to have been. Imagine what that's saying to the organization. Imagine the disrespect shown in that. And imagine if they're not taught, because obviously you would be showing that you're not taught to do these things. And if you don't teach someone to do these things, you're teaching someone to be disrespectful and irresponsible. And the worst thing you could ever say is, they're just children. You got to let them grow up. When I was growing up, I had to learn to wash dishes, learn to run the wash machine, clean my bedroom. That was kind of expected of me. That was part of growing up. I would hate to be someone that, you go to get married and your house is trashed and your wife goes, what? You don't know how to clean? Oh, no, that's what you're for. That's what my mom and dad did. I thought that's why I'm getting married. That's your job now. You're going to see an engagement ring go flying across the yard. No, I don't think so. You need to go live with your mom and dad and tell them to train you the right way because they didn't get it done the first time. When you think about these things, think about the stumbling blocks and the obstacles we can put in front of a child by telling them, no, you don't have to do it. Yeah, you do have to do it. Yeah, you should be responsible for cleaning up your mess. That is the bare minimum you should do. Now, there may be times to where people pitch in, like sometimes the Peaceful Solution headquarters, we'll have community meals, and a lot of people pitch in and they clean up everybody's mess. That's very different than having something that's assigned to you and you kind of just throw it around and wait for someone else to clean it up. Because you know what? If you leave a mess and you come in the next day and it's like, oh, wow, everything's clean. Well, it had to be someone responsible that came in and did it. Otherwise, it would be the same mess that you left. And imagine what it would be like after a few months. It would be like hoarding. You know, you have to work your way through just to find your way into the place. Everything I just told you is how my mom used to describe my bedroom. That's pretty much was me. I had to learn to, you know, I had a chest or drawer for my clothes to be in, but for some reason I always thought they worked just fine beside of it. They could be in a stack and they'd be okay. Clean here, dirty here. You know, I just thought the furniture was it was just in my way, actually. It took me a while to realize that, you know, that's the only way your clothes will last if you will do this, if you'll take care of them. But once again, finish reading this for tonight. I'll go back to the second paragraph here. It says, responsibility is developed through everyday task, interaction, and experiences. So that's our opportunity to develop, are these experiences and these tasks. If we try to avoid them, we're hurting ourselves. Some tasks can seem tedious and boring. Just trying to get your child to consistently keep his bedroom clean or take out the garbage without constant reminders. Teaching responsibility in this day and age is very challenging because society promotes entertainment rather than family values, positive work ethic, honesty, and service to others. You know, in closing, I'll remind everyone here, one of the responsibilities the author of The Peaceful Solution used to stress, and he did this for many years as I've known him, up until the day he passed away, he stressed that families get together at a dining room table and eat together. You know, don't throw your children off this way in the rooms with TVs, video games, you go out here, you do that. But actually have times where you can eat together. Find a way to spend family time together. Do something to create that. And in today's fast-paced society with everything going this way and that way and everybody involved in different activities and different classes, and that can be a really challenging thing to do. Because, you know, I think about even in my family situation, if I'm not at a class, somebody else in my family is. If I'm not involved in an activity, somebody else is. Trying to get everybody in one place at one time can be a huge challenge. But you know that the information that was given on how, you know, it's a necessity to try to at least do it. Don't neglect it. Do it at least once a week. Start once a week. At least have the table setting there, you know. Get it something going. And of course, then it will be much better. Everything will start working out. So we're going to stop right here. The next teacher will be William. He's going to pick up the next class. It's going to be Procedure 4 here on the bottom of page 71, Procedure 4, and our next class will be this coming Sunday, August the 31st at 5:30 p.m. We look forward to seeing all of you back here once again. Thank you for joining us.